My name is Sam, and I'm Head of Partnerships at National Student Esports. Intel FutureGen is a leadership program that we run here in the UK with university students. And the aim of this webinar series is to give more of you kind of an overview and an insight into the esports landscape. So the first session today, we're actually joined by Malph, who is Managing Director of Strive Sponsorship. And Malph is going to give us an overview of the esports landscape. So over to you, Malph.
Hi guys, sorry about those issues. Thank you for your time today. There's going to be four things broadly that I'm going to cover with you today. One is just basically a bit of an intro and background to me, just so you know who's talking to you. A little bit of an overview of the ecosystem, or that obviously will be the core of it, and how the different companies within that ecosystem work with one another, how they're categorized, that sort of thing. I'll talk a little as well about maybe some of the different types of jobs available in those companies and how they might differ depending on where they sit in that ecosystem. And if we have time, we'll cover just some general tips as well. But I'm aware of the time frame that we've got to work in today. So that's what we're going to cover. So just to give you a bit of background on me, I've worked in the broader sports, esports, and entertainment industry for quite a few years now, for about 18 years. I work across a number of different types of business, whether it's advising investors on investing into the world of esports and sports, and that could be businesses like private equity. Some of you may have seen in the press, certainly in the world of rugby, that this is quite a big theme at the moment, where outside investment is coming in and buying different companies and leagues and that sort of thing. So we work in that area. We also work with brands, so companies like Guinness, BT, Sky, that sort of thing. And then we also work with what we term rights holders, so teams, leagues, federations, but we'll come on to that in the ecosystem. Kind of the way that we, how do we do that? Well, we don't, funnily enough, have an employee model for our business. Instead, what we have is a network of independent experts who we work with, and we curate that expertise to deliver those skills to our clients. In terms of who we've worked with, this is, I guess, just a bit of a snapshot. A variety of teams and brands there, pulling out some of the esports specific work we've done. We've worked with endemic brands like Gfinity and Game and Fortress Melbourne down in Australia. We've also worked with maybe some companies that you might not immediately associate with esports, but are looking at the space, people like World Rugby, the English Cricket Board, Sail GP. And then we've worked with companies who are looking to leverage the popularity of esports from a marketing standpoint. So BT, I guess, is some of the most recent work we've done in their partnership with Excel. So I'm just going to cover the esports landscape, and this is really going to be split into two elements. There's going to be what I term the field of play. So what people, I think, immediately think of when they think of esports. And then we'll look at really, beneath that field of play, a whole array of other types of businesses and infrastructure that makes up the broader esports ecosystem. And where opportunities exist in a variety of different ways for people from an employment standpoint. Now, I apologize now that some of these slides might be quite heavy on content, but hopefully we can pick our way through. So I recognize that a number of you in the audience will be really familiar with esports, and so some of this won't be so new to you, whereas others it may be, quite, a bit familiar or not familiar at all, but we'll hopefully pitch this in the right place. But look, broadly speaking, there are a number of different categories of businesses that exist and indeed interact with one another in what I term the esports field of play. So what people immediately think of when they think of esports. You've got your games publishers. So people like your Riot Games, publisher of League of Legends, EA, publisher of games like FIFA, and a number of those other sorts of entities that you can see there. You have your competitions. Now, they could be publisher-owned competitions, so things like League of Legends is owned and largely run, certainly at the elites level, by Riot, and obviously Overwatch League run by Activision. But then you have your third-party owned competition. So these are separate companies that generally acquire a license from the game publisher to operate different esports competitions. And these might be at the elites level, so with the best teams and players in the world, right down to the grassroots and student level. So NSE is an example. They run, obviously, as you know, a number of competitions for a number of different publishers, but they are an independent events organizer who do that for the game publisher, albeit in partnership to a greater or lesser extent, depending on who that game publisher is. There are also teams, so teams that obviously compete in the competitions, whether they be publisher owned or third party, and those teams obviously are made of players. Most teams have fans, depending on what level you're at. And certainly a trend that we're seeing with a lot of the elite teams is that they'll have content creators, whether they be streamers or YouTubers, who now work with those teams to deliver an amount of content around that team and indeed around the games that they play in. The other two stakeholders within this part of the ecosystem are what I've termed broadcasters. So I guess your traditional broadcast, we've seen League of Legends and CSGO played on and shown on channels like BBC Three, BT Sport are showing FIFA. And then what was once termed new media, but really isn't new anymore, channels that I'm sure you're all familiar with, like Twitch, Facebook and YouTube Gaming, who all broadcast content as well. And then brands, and really brands are involved across the ecosystem from a standpoint of leveraging relationships with all of these different types of stakeholders in order to achieve their marketing objectives. The purpose, as I say, of this session is really just to kind of lay out in your mind the different types of companies, how they might be categorized and how they may coexist. All of the arrows and lines you can see between those different stakeholder groups, really that's just money flow, who is paying who's making money from different things. It's not really pertinent to this session. It's more really just understanding how the ecosystem functions from a commercial standpoint. But these elements, with the exception of fans, I would suggest, and to a degree, content creators, albeit they do have a number of them do have staff or agencies working with them, are all potential employers of different people. And we'll talk a little more about what those job roles might be later on in the session. So the wider ecosystem under the field of play, as I would term it, there are a number of other different types of stakeholders. They're not always what people would immediately associate with esports and the broader gaming ecosystem, unless actually you raise it and then people go, oh yeah, I kind of didn't really consider them to be part of the industry, but completely understand why they are. So while the shiny bits may be teams and leagues and broadcasters, there's a whole raft of other businesses that exist, I guess, to both support that field of play, that infrastructure, to help maximize the value of it, and indeed to help fans and indeed consumers access and get the most from their passion for gaming and esports. If we run through these, you've got people like festivals. So Insomnia, UK's largest gaming festival, has esports elements in terms of LAN competitions, but also appeals to the broader gaming fan and participant from a point of view of indulging their passions. You've got venues. Obviously, again, this is a growing trend, certainly amongst professional esports teams who are all starting to build their own home stadia, for want of a better term. But there are obviously venues that they might compete in, whether that's esports arena like at the Luxor in Vegas, or whether that be people like Fortress Melbourne down in Australia. You've got your matchmaking platforms. Again, I'm sure some of you are super familiar with some of these brands, people like Faceit. So give you the ability to play against other players of a similar skill level to you in the games that you want to play in. And then you've got people like competition infrastructure. So a lot of these brands or companies might not be consumer brands, i.e., they might not be visible to you as a gamer or as a esports participant. They might be B2B brands, so they provide infrastructure that help facilitate the delivery of services of companies that you are familiar with. So Battlefy, who create a lot of tournament infrastructure, they often will help other competitions, or I should say competitions, run their competitions by providing the technology to do that. You've got social and professional networks. I mean, Discord obviously is probably the best known, certainly given it being in the news as well in the last couple of days after the rumored potential Microsoft acquisition. Gaming tools, so whether it's things that help you clip your own content and share that on social media, or whether it's technology to help reduce lag on your connection. Training tools, so how do you become a better player, used from the pros downwards. You've got betting, wagering, and fantasy products. So the difference between those are betting essentially is I think this outcome is going to happen. Wagering is I'm going to play a game against you. We can each put £10 on it, and whoever wins takes the money. And fantasy based on points allocated to certain actions performed. Given certain parameters you're working within, allow you to compete against other people without actually playing. It's leveraging more on the fandom of things, and obviously they can be incentivized with money as well. DraftKings is probably another famous brand there that is based on that model. Then you have data businesses, and look, the list that you see here is not an exhaustive list of all of the different companies that exist within these different categories of businesses. They're just there to illustrate some of the brands that do exist. Data is, I guess, is quite a wide term of reference, but you've got businesses there like Sport Radar and Genius Sports, who will often take data from games and from live competition, provide that to bookmakers who can then produce odds. Equally, they provide data to people that are checking that there's no denial of service attacks, checking that nobody's using aim bots in different games. It's essentially integrity data that can help identify if people are cheating. And that kind of leads us on to ESIC, the Esports Integrity Coalition, which essentially analyzes gameplay to ensure that it's a fair and level playing field for all of the member tournaments and platforms that are part of it. You then have marketing technology businesses. There are a phenomenal number of these, given the different nuances of marketing. You have people like Blinkfire Analytics. So very simply, what they do is they look at all of the live competition that is being streamed, shown on linear TV, shared via social media, and they help teams, for instance, understand the relative value of the visibility they are giving to their sponsors. And they attribute a value to that, which basically is, if you were to buy this exposure in advertising, how much would this be worth? So that's Blinkfire. And then you have people like Fan AI, who essentially are looking at purchase behavior. So they look at who are all the people you're engaging with, or who are all the fans that follow you on social media, engage with you, watch your streams, and who are they away from gaming and esports? What are they interested in? What are they buying? And then that intelligence is used by teams and leagues to inform what sponsors might suit them. It's used to inform their direct-to-consumer propositions, i.e., is it worth us creating and selling a merchandise line on the basis of who our fans are? There's a whole raft of different types of technologies that essentially help that field of play stakeholder group market to fans and consumers. And then you have media tech businesses. So you've got businesses like Blink, which is an Israeli business, which essentially in real time ingests esports competition and through AI automatically clips what the most exciting or relevant highlights are that allow you then to post that out on social media almost instantaneously. But it also helps create association between different types of content, which works quite well for broadcasters and their editorial systems. So there's a whole raft of different businesses that you may not immediately associate with the world of esports, but are fundamental to the health of the ecosystem and it functioning as a commercial entity. And I think that's quite important to say because esports for a long time has been delivered by passionate people, volunteers, and people who own their own businesses, but really they've been hobby or bedroom businesses. However, in the last number of years, it's really started to commercially mature. And like any industry, to sustain and grow, it needs to be commercially viable. And to that end, those businesses need to make money in order to employ people and invest in growing and delivering essentially the products that we consumers, fans, and pros play in, and indeed amateurs play in and aspire to. So all of these elements work with one another in a greater or lesser extent. All of them have opportunities to work within. A lot of people, and certainly I class myself in this, when I was at university and I was looking for jobs, I would think about, and at that time I was keen to get into the sports industry. I was thinking about the brands I was most familiar with, which are really, that field of play. It hadn't ever really occurred to me that there were other companies that worked within the sports industry that I might not be as familiar with, but nevertheless did really interesting work, worked with interesting people, and did interesting things and potentially utilized my skills in a different way. There's also a number of other types of stakeholders that I guess service the whole of the ecosystem and indeed are relevant outside of the world of esports as well. You have agencies, and these could be agencies like mine, which are, sponsorship, marketing, commercial agencies. They could be agencies like AOE, which is a creative agency, so developing, visuals, copywriting, um, advertising campaigns. They could be agencies like AFK, which looks after talent, so content creators as well as professional players. They also provide influencer support to brands. So within the word agency, there are whole different types of agencies that provide different services. You've also what's called professional services companies. So whether it's law firms like Sheridan's who help players negotiate contracts with different teams or help teams negotiate contracts with different broadcasters. They help with employee law, with contract law, with commercial law. There's a whole variety of different roles that the legal entities play. You also have accountancy firms that work across this. You've got management consultancies, people like Deloitte, PwC, Bain, Accenture, all of those sorts of businesses that will probably have a gaming and maybe an esports element. And the services they provide can be many. They can help cities with their strategy on how to attract gaming and esports events and or businesses to them to help with the prosperity of that city. And some of you may have seen that Queen Elizabeth Centre over in the Olympic Park in London has been putting together a strategy on how does it attract gaming audiences. Vancouver in Canada has been doing something similar, whereby it's put together an esports strategy for how does it attract competitions and how does it promote an ecosystem. And the UAE have just recently announced certain preferential terms for visas for players and companies to exist there. So there's all sorts of different types of companies that exist there that still work within esports. We also have media companies now, obviously slightly different to the broadcasters, maybe people like Dexerto and Dot Esports. So yes, they're covering a broader remit than just esports, but they're reporting on results on who's moving from where to where, what the latest thing is going on, as well as latest game title releases, how maybe Valorant is progressing from a game into an esport and how that ecosystem's going. So you've got print media, you've got digital media, you've got broadcast media, some of which is specific to esports, some of which sits across esports gaming, and some of which, like Sky Sports and BBC, is maybe what you would term traditional media, who now see esports and gaming as an important genre for them to cover aside from maybe what their traditional output was. You also have research companies, Newzoo, YouGov, people like Esports Charts, providing a whole raft of information, whether it be broadcast statistics or information about the types of people that engage with esports. Now, they may be studies that are ongoing that they do. They may be bespoke things. They would work with teams. They would work with leagues. They would work with broadcasters. They would work with sponsors. Sometimes they work with media. And then you've got investors, and I talked a little bit about some of the work that we do. And there are also, people like Roundhill and Bitcraft. So Bitcraft, who invest directly into businesses to help them grow. And then people like Roundhill, who essentially create investment products for people like you and me to invest in, essentially making a bet on whether those esports companies will do well, earn money, grow, and therefore create a return on investment, just like investing in shares may be. So if you come from a financial background or an analytical background, there are potential ways to still indulge your passion through a financial services lens. So I just want to kind of touch on a few things for you guys to frame in your mind when you're thinking about what type of jobs may be available to you and how you might look at a company to understand whether there are opportunities for you. And I've called the first one kind of core function. So pretty much in any business, there are a number of core functions, no matter what industry you're in. Things like human resources, finance, marketing, sales, procurement. So that's buying and purchasing, research and development, and indeed things like production. Those core services exist whether you're Apple or whether you're ESL. There is still a need to look after people. There is still a need to pay bills. There is still a need to market and sell and purchase things. So there are core functions within every business in and out of esports that offer opportunities from a job standpoint. So have a think about that when if you're, I don't know, doing an HR degree and thinking, well, I'm not doing anything that's esports related. It doesn't matter so much. Really, any job is a confluence of industry knowledge and skill set. And certainly where esports has come from and where it's going to is it's had a real critical mass of people that understand the industry, but maybe haven't had the skill sets that they've needed in order to help their businesses progress. And right now, what we're seeing is a huge amount of new talent flooding into esports that has more of the skill set and less of the industry knowledge to provide those skills to help those companies function and grow. Obviously, the ideal is you have a mix of the two. You have the industry knowledge and the skill set, but if you're in one category or another, you still have the ability to learn. But my personal view is it's a lot easier to have the skill set and learn the industry than to know the industry stuff and learn those skill sets. The other way of looking at things is elements that are specific, as it says there, to the company type. What do I mean by that? So when I was running through that ecosystem, if we take teams, esports teams, there are certain functions that are likely to be specific to an esports team that might not be relevant in another type of company. So if we take games publishers and esports teams as an example, in an esports team, you generally are split into two areas. You have what you call your performance team and your commercial team. So your performance team tend to deal with players and coaches. So you may need a whole load of skill sets like nutrition, psychology, chefs, a whole raft of things that are pertinent to players and optimizing their performance. But at the same time, you have commercial needs, people that can sell to sponsors, people that can market the team, people that can build direct to consumer propositions like merchandise, people that can run social media channels. So there are some things there that I've mentioned that are true of lots of organizations, but certainly on the performance element, there are some that are true to a team, whereas a company like Riot is unlikely to have a nutritionist specialist or a psychologist specialist that is serving a player base like a team would be. In sport, you have somebody, for instance, called a resettlement officer. So whenever a football club buys a player, certainly a player from abroad, and they need a house, they need a car, they need a bank account, they need schools for their kids, they are basically people that will help set all of that stuff up. And I use that point really just to illustrate that there are certain job types that are specific to certain types of company that may exist in that type of business, like a team in the ecosystem, but don't exist anywhere else. So think about what type of businesses they are, what they do, and the expertise and skills they might need to do it. And that will give you kind of a good frame of reference for considering what jobs there may be. The last thing is things that are specific to the industry. Again, there are things that are relevant in esports that aren't relevant in sports. So there may be gaming publisher relations managers. So, there may be people at Excel or Fnatic whose job it is to liaise with Riot or liaise with Activision or whoever it may be. Indeed, there may be creator managers. So, Fnatic obviously have a number of different creators, G2 do, and there'll be people whose job it is to manage the interaction with them, ensure the output is there. Now, you don't have those kind of jobs in other industries. That doesn't exist within the sports industry. Even within professional Premier League football teams that might have a FIFA team, generally none of them have really creator managers. And certainly don't really have publisher relations because it's at the moment not a core element of their business. People like PSG and Schalke may do, but it's probably to a lesser extent than a pure play esports team. But I mentioned these three elements just to really frame in your minds that there are really different ways to cut a business up and look at it from a standpoint of what opportunities might exist for me as an individual looking to enter the industry. One kind of tip I would, or kind of direction I would give you, if esports is something you're keen to do, and you may have in your mind a job that you really want, don't always apply just for that job. And the reason I say that is, like I said earlier, jobs really require two things. They require knowledge and skill set. And sometimes you need to acquire one or other, or sometimes you need to be better practiced. Even if you have good industry knowledge, you might need more experience in it. So have a look at other jobs that might not be your ideal, but you think might contribute to you as a professional, that give you that knowledge, give you that experience, or give you the skill sets that will ultimately help you get the got the job that you want at the end of the day. Just to give you an example of how that worked for me. So I applied to a lot of sports companies when I left university. I didn't get any of the jobs. I then went and started work at Accenture. And one of the reasons for that was because I thought Accenture would give me a really good set of business skills, as well as it would give me a variety, an experience of working in a variety of different industries and for different companies. Off the back of Accenture, I got a job at the BBC. And at the BBC, I worked in more of a marketing role. And as part of that, I worked on the Olympics and the European Championships in football. So again, it gave me some skills that I didn't have beyond my university degree. It gave me some additional marketing skills, and it then gave me a little bit of sports experience. I then worked at Barclays and worked a little bit on Premier League football, round the world yacht race. So the job I got at Barclays was because at the BBC I'd done a bit in sport and I'd done a bit in marketing. I wouldn't have been able to go straight from Accenture to Barclays. It would have been too big a leap because I wouldn't have had that relevant experience. What the BBC liked about my Accenture experience was the consultative approach, because they brought me in as like an internal consultant. And from Barclays, I then went and worked at a sports agency. Having then worked for a company sponsoring sports, the sports agency I worked for, which is ultimately where I wanted to start my career, but took me 6 years essentially to get there. They hired me because they saw I now had experience of working for a sponsor, and I had a perspective of the industry, and I had skills that they didn't have within their business. Now, some people are lucky, you can go straight in to the job you want in the company that you want. But I think others, you need to be a little more strategic and calculate. And certainly in the market that we see ourselves in now, where opportunities are few and far between, and in nascent industries like esports, and to a degree still sports, a lot of jobs are given, given to people, are seen by people who already have a network within that industry. Because there are fewer jobs, trust is a really important factor when hiring people. And if you're recommended by somebody in that industry, or if you're already known to them, that certainly does give you additional value when you're going through the recruitment process. That's not saying you're given any special treatment. It's just if somebody knows you better or knows the person that's recommended you, then there's that extra element of kind of reassurance when it comes to hiring that you're going to be a good hire. So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. And I think that pretty much covers it, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you, Malph, for that. And that was a pretty in-depth overview of the whole esports landscape. So if anyone's got any questions in the Twitch chat, pop them in and we will try and answer them offline. But we've run out of time, and we're going to actually go to the Q&A with the Intel FutureGen cohort, which is kind of behind closed doors. But this VOD will be available on our Twitch channel and also our YouTube channel in the coming days as well. So thank you, Malph, for being part of this Intel FutureGen session. And thank you to Intel for supporting Intel FutureGen. So that's it from us, and we will see you in the coming weeks. Thank you.